Hey everyone, welcome to today's explainer. Okay, I want you to picture this. Imagine a single Tuesday where a royal visit, sweeping domestic indictments, and a Middle Eastern economic collapse all magically align to signal a massive shift in global power. Well, you actually don't have to imagine it, because that is the exact massive claim put forward by a recent channel called Promethean Updates. The source material argues that one specific Tuesday fundamentally shifted global power dynamics in real time. So today, we're going to unpack their highly complex, intricately woven narrative. Now, we aren't here to take sides or validate these claims. Rather, we're going to carefully deconstruct the source material to understand exactly how it builds this sweeping, intricate political theory. Okay, let's dive into this.
Here's our roadmap for untangling this highly complex web. We'll start with the video's core thesis, then look at three main pillars: the royal visit, domestic legal actions, and Middle East economics. Finally, we'll wrap it all up with the overarching narrative.
All right, Section 1, the video's core thesis.
To wrap our heads around the specific events discussed, we really have to grasp the overarching framework first. You see, the video frames modern global events not as isolated random incidents, but as an epic, ongoing battle between independent, sovereign nations and a deeply entrenched global power. To ground ourselves in the highly charged terminology of the source material, we need to look at this definition. The narrative repeatedly refers to an antagonist it calls the empire. According to this worldview, we're not talking about a historical empire with wooden ships and muskets. No, it's defined as a modern British financial system that seeks to control global policy, manipulate oil prices, and dictate terms to sovereign nations like the United States. Whenever the theory mentions the empire, this specific financial and political network is exactly what they are talking about.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 2, Pillar 1, the royal visit. Okay, so the source frames King Charles's visit to Donald Trump in a pretty wild way. It's not a standard diplomatic meeting. Rather, it describes the UK as essentially begging the US to maintain a relationship that allegedly crippled America since World War II. During this visit, Trump referenced a historical meeting between Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. The narrative highlights this specific quote from FDR to Churchill condemning backwards colonial policy. The interpretation here? Well, they're saying Trump's choice to reference FDR is a super deliberate, coded pushback against what is viewed as the British Empire's lingering 18th century colonial methods. According to this storyline, Trump is telling the king that the old ways of extracting wealth without building up nations are totally over.
But the theory asserts that King Charles fired right back. In his speech to Congress, the king referenced the Magna Carta. Now, normally you'd think, okay, standard historical reference, right? Well, the narrative frames this Magna Carta mention as a subtle, incredibly calculated attack on Trump's executive power, basically reminding him about checks and balances. The argument suggests this is the empire actively trying to reassert its influence within the very halls of Congress.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how deep the connections go in this theory. The narrative hinges on a seemingly quaint moment where Trump showed King Charles the White House beehives. According to ancient British folklore highlighted in the material, you absolutely must formally tell the bees of any major household change, especially a new master, or the hive will abandon you. The sweeping claim is made that this wasn't just a simple, friendly garden tour. It was Trump symbolically declaring to the king that America is the new global master.
Moving right along to Section 3, Pillar 2, domestic legal actions.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the source shifts from international diplomacy right to the domestic front, placing profound weight on this specific number, 8647. The narrative claims that former FBI Director James Comey used this numerical code in an Instagram seashell message, essentially a post containing hidden or coded meaning for insiders. According to this highly charged interpretation, this was a coded solicitation for an assassination attempt against Donald Trump, and the storyline asserts that the Justice Department actively targeted Comey on this specific Tuesday to combat this alleged threat.
Let's systematically unpack how the video maps these assertions out. It ties together three vastly different legal events happening simultaneously. First, as we just discussed, the alleged DOJ indictment of James Comey over the 8647 threat. Second, moving down the list, the narrative weaves in David Morens, a former assistant to Dr. Anthony Fauci. It claims he was indicted to expose a cover-up regarding the Wuhan lab and COVID-19 origins. Finally, the theory asserts that a task force led by Vice President Vance conducted federal raids in Minnesota to stop billions in welfare fraud allegedly being laundered to Democratic political campaigns. Again, we are strictly maintaining our distance here and just tracing the argument's architecture, noting how it synchronizes three totally distinct legal events into one massive domestic cleanup operation.
All right, Section 4, Pillar 3, Middle East economics.
Having covered the domestic courts, the video pivots globally once more, using a very specific mechanical logic to explain Iran's alleged collapse. First, they claim a U.S. blockade has completely filled Iran's oil storage. Moving to step 2, the narrative notes a physical reality of oil drilling. Physics demand that oil must keep flowing, or the built-up pressure will literally destroy the wells. So in step 3, the theory concludes that Iran is facing total economic and physical infrastructure collapse, forcing them to essentially beg the U.S. to open the Strait of Hormuz.
But you're probably wondering, how does Iran's oil connect back to the King of England? Well, the theory loops these Middle Eastern developments right back to its core thesis. The argument suggests the U.S. Treasury targeted Iranian shadow banking, noting that a massive chunk of these banks and millions in Iranian real estate wealth are sheltered directly in London, which, of course, is the heart of the empire. Furthermore, the narrative highlights the UAE breaking away from the OPEC oil cartel to produce more oil, while the U.S. creates its own shipping insurance. All of this is framed as a highly coordinated dismantlement of British financial control over global energy.
And finally, Section 5, the overarching narrative.
So, the crucial point is how cleanly the source constructs a binary worldview out of all these disparate pieces. On one side, you have the empire, characterized by British financial control, manipulated oil markets through OPEC, and domestic political fraud. On the exact opposite side, you have what the video calls Trump's Great Reset, characterized by independent, sovereign nations, American energy dominance, and the aggressive prosecution of domestic networks. The narrative wants you to believe that on this one specific Tuesday, the empire's worldview visibly shattered and the Great Reset took control.
Which brings us to a final, really provocative thought. Regardless of where you stand on the politics, take a step back and look at the sheer architecture of the argument we just deconstructed. How do media narratives successfully tie vastly disparate global events together? I mean, we're talking about everything from ancient royal beekeeping traditions to cryptic Instagram posts to the literal physical pressure of Middle Eastern oil wells, all woven into one singular sweeping political theory. It's a truly fascinating look at modern media literacy and narrative construction. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning how the stories around you are built.